Hello and welcome to another episode of Ideaprov with your host Mike Pedersen. I'm here with a good friend of mine that we work together, and his name's Daniel. And every single time we cross in the hallway, there was always some really positive, energetic conversations. So when I came up with the Ideaprov, there was some people that I had in mind, and he was one of the people that I said, you know what, I gotta get him on an episode some way, somehow, to kind of share his life, his experiences, and get some good energy flowing through it. So I want to introduce him, give him the floor for a minute to let him know what he's all about. And so how you doing today, Daniel? What's life like?
Man, Mike, I'm good, Brad. I'm really good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. I can't complain.
Yeah. Well, man, I wanted to say thank you, man. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me on the podcast, man. And I don't take it lightly. This is an honor to be on here, man. So we can chat it up, talk, and get into a couple of things. So, thank you.
All right. So the pleasure's been all mine. So with kind of a profound brother such as yourself, what has been on the mind? What has been your focus? What has been your passion? Where have you put your creative juices recently?
Well, I mean, just to start off, I guess my professional vocation is digital design and / web developer, in which I do that for a corporation or a company of restaurants. And so really trying to utilize my creativity, man, to uplift, build, encourage, people, and especially young people. So that's really been where I've been at right now, especially in the landscape that we're in right now, man, with COVID and everything is changing, everything is going virtual, really trying to find and help people and find ways to help people make connections in this space that we're in right now.
So with those connections, are we talking about more professional connections, more personal connections? Are you trying to have people kind of vibe in the same lane, like bring positivity, or is it more like professional networking?
Well, man, just really trying to be a light and be a help in any way that I can, utilizing all my skill set, man, from creativity to digital to social, to really be a light and help people, navigate through this time that we're in right now. So if that's helping them on the technology side, helping them start their live stream, or if it's working with the youth at my church and staying connected with them, and during the summer months, and it's just multiple things. But whatever I find my hands to do creatively to really help people, be the better, be them better selves, and to just encourage people, give people light, man.
Yeah, I think you're on the right path. Because I think I wouldn't say there's a lot of people that I feel are lost. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and so when you can help in multiple different avenues of people's lives and be able to help, nurture their own creativity and kind of nudge them in the right direction, or be that sounding board for them, I think that can go a huge way to kind of help people feel at ease in these uncertain times. So I gotta commend you for that, because it's not everybody that kind of goes about it that way. A lot of people like to take care of their own, and being able to spread that is going to be impactful, I think.
Yeah, definitely, man. It's like, with this, new way of doing things, with the social distancing and everything that's going on, man, we really, just trying to find ways to, utilize your whole self, and that's the part of being creative as well, is to find, aspects of yourself that you can give to others that will help them, So it's not I'm doing this or I'm doing this, but it's more like I'm doing this and I'm utilizing this skill set, my skill set in this, and I'm utilizing my skill set in technology. I'm utilizing my skill set in encouraging. I'm utilizing my skill set in so many different ways. And I think when you look at it that way, that it's it's a complete picture of things, instead of being so monopic into I have to help someone in this particular way.
I found myself doing the same thing, right? Taking on new skills, new ideas, new ways of working. I mean, with just this podcast alone, like I've become, seems like a marketing manager. I've become a video editor. I've become a sound engineer and all these kinds of things. And then there's sometimes where people ask me like, hey, have you ever, dabbled in that? And I've been like, well, as a matter of fact, I have. Like, I didn't think I was going to be editing, sound clips, but now, yes, I do have a little bit of experience. And it's sharing that little bit of knowledge to help somebody in a different way than you might not normally do. It's kind of fun too.
It is, because you're trying to find ways to engage, and you're really looking within yourself to say, how can I help this person? What skill set do I have? And then you learn how to be resourceful. And like you said, when it comes to sound, sound tech, and learning how to EQ, even this podcast, or even trying to find ways to see how you can encourage someone and make, put a smile on their face, and that may be, looking at a joke, or getting a joke from social media and sharing that, on your news feed or something like that, or in your story. So it's just multiple ways to be creative, man, and to build the people that's around you and abroad. So
wonderful. Yeah, I think you're spot on. We're on the same path and doing things for good. Now, I think you kind of touched on something that kind of brings us to our topic for today, in the fact of bringing people along and sharing things for good, and passing the positive energy. And that's what's really about our topic for today, in the fact that we wanted to talk about how do we instill and help bridge the skills we've found valuable from generation to generation. So, of course, our parents taught us wonderful things. We're going to hopefully teach our kids wonderful things. But there's some things that maybe we didn't learn, or some gaps in information. And we want to try and close those, of course. But my first inclination about how to bridge these gaps is, one, I feel like you have to make your best attempt to try and put some of those thoughts, those feelings, those teachings together by, potentially physically putting those two generations together. So putting the older generation, the grandparents, with the young ones, so that way they can instill the generation. They won't play that telephone with you in the middle, and just having that authentic vibe in the middle, I guess you could say, to kind of pass those skills naturally. However, in the world of COVID, we're in a little bit of a different circumstance. So I realized that, but I think we have to really focus on what are the values, and not so much the how, or trying to do it in the same fashion, right? So whether it's honesty, whether it's integrity, all those kinds of things, like, they can be taught in many different ways. So I think you almost have to find a way that's going to resonate with the next generation, what the older generation went through. Does that seem on point, off base? Yeah,
I definitely hear what you're saying. To one of your first points, as far as that gathering, especially in the time that we're in right now, just trying to find creative ways to gather. And so we're in a world of technology, just tech, from your phone to your watch, wearable technology, and it's all around us. And so finding ways to gather, even in the time that we're in right now. So that could be, FaceTime with the grandparents, and the her the granddaughter, or the grandbabies, or story time, and finding ways that we can still gather So that's a great point in that. And I think when it comes to that bridge, you really have to like look deep inside yourself and really do like an introspect of yourself and all the values that you've learned, and that you picked up, and why are they valuable to you? Why are they valuable? So they can be, they can be, I guess, put or they can be handed down to the next generation. And so if that's making sure that, saying that you're whole or you're healed in certain areas, and to make sure that what you're passing down is valuable in the sense of knowing that, hey, and that includes just not all the good, positive things. That may just be, that's the great, that's the good, that's the bad, that's the ugly. But finding ways that, you have to look within yourself and find value in that, and find ways that you can present that to the next generation, and let them know that, hey, this is valuable because it wasn't a good experience, but this is what I've learned from that. And be an open book in that sense, and because it's so many times where, we hold the bad and just give out the good, and I don't think we're doing the next generation service and justice when we do that, and also we're not giving them hope,
Yes. Yes.
to let them know that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, because I think that gets. I've spoken about it on other episodes. It's the ability to kind of humanize, right? To say I'm not perfect. To take a step back and show, hey, these are the things. These are where I misstepped in, or I felt I misstepped in life. And the thing is, a lot of these missteps are not what we typically would think of as far as missteps. They could just be, maybe you pivoted a little bit too long, or something like that. So it's interesting that you brought that up, because I think it's super valuable to show the entire spectrum of, I guess, those experiences in life. One of the things that I've always taken away, especially from my parents with those experiences, is that they were always very influential in showing me not only their experiences, but how those experiences affected those around them, to give me a wide perspective of, hey, this is how you operate, but this is how it also impacts the world. This is how my friends felt. This is how my other family members felt. This is how my work colleagues felt. These are how these different groups of people felt or interacted with them on such and such occasion, so that I felt like I got a full 360 experience of what it meant to make that step in that direction. So I think you're kind of on the same basis. I think in the nature of how to relay those, I think we have to be very cognizant of how the next generation is going to perceive some of the teachings that we're talking about, because things have changed tremendously in the last 80 years. I mean, you're talking about going back from like the mid-1950s to now. You have people that are able to physically see other people on the other side of the world via FaceTime. We didn't have phones all the way back to this. So getting the next generation, which is very quick to focus on other things sometimes, the value of sitting down and internalizing these so they can kind of apply it to their own lives, I think is going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I'm laughing because, that's questions that I'm constantly, asking myself and evaluating within myself, is like, how can I get the values and the lessons to the next generation? I'm a father of 3, and it's I have two teenagers. in the house, and with the today's teenager, man, it's like they have access to technology and have access to information at the palm of their hands, and so your teenager will fact check you if you tell them something like that may be slightly off, or they want to know about. And so having that accessibility, you have to find, I think, ways to really get into their world and understand how they may perceive the world. They see the world as, I don't want to date my age, man, but we didn't have cell phones, growing up in high school. I mean, cell phones was new, and you had to have money to have cell phones. We had, beepers and different things, but now they have, this thing called the internet at the palm of their hands on their cell phone, and social media that get the news out there faster than sometimes the news itself, and so understanding that, from their eyes that, everything is at their fingertips. And so understanding like how can I get into their world to understand, and so I can have that gathering place via virtual, via, in person. I can have that gathering place to where I can still instill the lessons that I find valuable, because over generations they don't change. Hard work is still hard work. You still have to work hard, and that's a lesson that you still have to teach the next generation, even if it's digitally. You still have to work your idea. Even if you want to be a social media influencer, you still have to work and post. So hard work doesn't change from generation to generation, right? But it's just how do the next generation take the essence of hard work and apply it into what they're doing at that time. You see, so if you have access to information, you have access to data, you have access to all these things, we should challenge the next generation to say, hey, now what are you going to do with it? And that's a way to still instill hard work, to say, hey, don't believe the lie that it doesn't take hard work, it doesn't take persistence, it doesn't take consistency to really achieve your goal. It's still going to take those things in this digital world, in this world that you're living in now, but now you have to find a way to leverage and utilize what's in your hand even more.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's a huge point, because I think there could be a lot of younger generation that might look at it and say, yes, I have the internet in the palm of my hand. I can do a ridiculous amount of things with social media. However, the ability to make yourself a little bit different so that way you succeed, like you press forward, is, I think, could be potentially lacking. Not to say don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really good, smart, intelligent young adults that are creative, that are changing the world. I can't name them off the top of my head, but I know there are. I've seen the articles, I've seen the channels and the things that they're doing with social good and whatnot. So I'm not downplaying that whatsoever. But I think there's also, on the flip side of that, there are a lot of teenagers, young 20-year-olds that are thinking, I can create myself a YouTube channel, or I'm gonna create myself a TikTok account, put up some funny videos, and I'm gonna do this. Somebody's gonna find me, I'm gonna go viral. Next thing you know, I'm gonna be making $20 million a month, because I'm the most hilarious, funny person on the planet. And while that is a possibility, the probability for most is it's not gonna happen, right? So I think what you touched on is like, what are you gonna do with these values? And so, like, I want to bring back to you a question that I thought of, in anticipation of this podcast, and I said, is it more important to instill the values that we, as I guess you could say the middle generation, feel is the most impactful that they need? Or is it more helpful to them to listen and learn the values that they want to learn for the way that they want to proceed in their life?
That's good. That's a good question. I think it takes a little bit of both. I think if you have one without the other, it will cause a deficiency. And so you have to find ways to bridge the values and what we have learned in our lives to the next generation, so they can problem solve and solve the things that their generation is dealing with. And so, because sometimes we know that history repeats itself, and I was telling my son one day, he was like, "Oh, Dad," he was telling me about a new fad and what they call the new wave. "Dad, this is the new wave, right? This is cool. This is the new wave." And I'm like, "Oh man, that's nothing but the," and it was a dance. I'm like, "That's nothing but we used to do that back in high school." And he said, "Oh no, but we do it differently." And so I say, "Oh, let me show you a couple of videos." And so I say that to say this, that it's still, history repeats itself. So it's going to take for us to let the next generation know about about what we've been through, even if they may have, problems in their generation that may be slightly different than, information is power. They're going to need that to actually tackle the problems that their generation is facing.
Yeah, it's true, because I think that's the most crucial, I guess, skill trait that we can teach the next generation, is how to problem solve, how to open their mind, how to think of things differently, how to take in information and not just regurgitate. So I think there's part of that that's an educational reform kind of topic, but I'm also looking at, it's the little things, right? So when the little one asks you, "Hey, what is, I don't know, what is slavery, or what is this, or what is that?" When they start talking about those type of issues, it's not the greatest, in my opinion anyway, to just regurgitate the information of what you've been taught, right? I think we have a responsibility to ourselves and the next generation to open up their mind to have a little bit bigger of a conversation. So what do you think education reform means? What do you think, legislative bodies should do as far as making laws? Even on a smaller scale, like, I don't know, when little kids like to ask, the things in the back of the car when you're driving, like, "Hey, mommy, what does a dentist do?" Things like of that nature. Like, okay, let's talk it through, so that way they get used to finding answers for themselves and allowing their minds to open up to find the problems themselves, rather than being stoic and just saying, "This is what I've been taught, this is what it is, I don't need to research, I don't need to look into it any further." To open up that playbook, and to realize that the world is constantly in motion, constantly learning in regards to what it is. Because if we stayed like that 20 years ago, I guarantee that we would have never had some of the innovations that we do today if people thinking stayed the same.
Dead on. I couldn't agree with you more, Mike, on that. And that piece of, that skill set of being a critical thinker is so vital in everything. And that entails being resilient, and being patient. That's another thing that I think a value that needs to be handed to our next generation is the value of patience and being patient. And when you're critically thinking and thinking your way through things, and like you said, prompting the young person to say, "Hey, what do you think about that?" You're automatically triggering something inside of them, that they're going to look within themselves and look at their perspective, how they see life, and they're going to to come up with an answer. And so that takes resilience, that takes a skill set of patience with that young person, you know what I'm saying, to understand that, hey, you know, they're trying to figure this out, you know what I'm saying, and it's important that I'm patient with them, because that way I am showing them patience and how to be patient with themselves. How to be really patient with themselves when it comes to thinking through some of these challenging things, you know, and not be so quick to respond, but actually be able to look within themselves and find the answer that their generation needs. So you're dead on.
Yeah, and you talked about the patience and the listening, and I know that was one of the big things that was very large in my family growing up. Was I remember many times doing homework at the table or something like that, and I would ask my mom, or I asked my dad, hey, how do I figure this out? How do I do whatever? And they would just tell me, well, tell me what you think about it. And knowing full well that I knew that my parents knew the answer because they were smart people, but they never gave me the easy road out and just told me what the answer was. You know, they would sit there and they would listen. They would say, and and all this kind of stuff while I'm just sitting there talking. And eventually, like, I would get there. And while it might have been frustrating when I was 12 or 13 and I wanted to get the answer so that way I could go play, it was really vital, because now whenever I need to think of something or come up with a solution, like, the first place that I go is inside my head. Is inside to try and figure it out, to try and tweak it. Now, there's another evolution of that, I believe, in which I can start going to others and kind of co-create solutions, hence Ideaprov, hello, plug. But I think that's huge in that patience piece. To jump back, and I also want to touch on another point from the listening and the patience, because you were talking about you know, your mom, and that's how we used to do it back in the day. I remember there was a dance move, I can't remember which one it was out, but my mom looked at my sister and I was kind of like, this is nothing new. We used to do this back in the 50s. It was called the Watusi, you know? It's like, the Watusi. Like, yeah. And of course, my mom, all 5'2" of her, you know, 100 pounds soaking wet, she whipped out the greatest Watusi I have ever seen, and she killed it. But it was just those moments, I guess, that you can't. She could have played that totally differently, right? But because she injected that creativity, she listened, she was patient, we went back and forth. And of course, she tried to do our dance move too, and you know, that was hilarious. But that was a great family moment that if she wouldn't have thought about it like that, it could have been like, you know, you youngsters or whatever, and could have been, you know, crotchety and old about it. You know, and I think that's a big portion. Like, you have to put yourself aside to be able to say, hey, listen, they can teach me as much as I can teach them. And just because of the way I know it now doesn't mean that that it can't be taught or it can't be learned in a different form or fashion.
That's perfect, Mike. And to that point, man, just understanding the power of play. The power of play, the being able to play with your kids, play with the next generation, or someone that you may mentor, if it's a video game, if it's actually doing a TikTok dance, whatever it is. The power of play is a platform and an area where you can instill the value, instill, you know, lessons of life, and say like, hey, you know, this young person, nothing new is under the sun. What you're doing right now, we've done before. You know, but we may have done it in a different way, you know, and we may have called it something a little different, but it's very, very similar. And have the young person understand, like, wow, okay, you know, I'm creating something, you know, that's within my generation, but it is still connected to the past. It's still connected to my lineage. It's still connected in a way, and so they'll find value. You know, even value in it. And one thing too, I because I work with a lot of young people, like I said before, maybe I didn't say this, but I'm a youth pastor at my church, and I work with a lot of young people. And one thing that, as I encourage young people, and you know, speak into their life, you know, positivity, it's important for me also to speak into the parents' lives, to understand the parents are the guardian life, because I think it's important for the parents to understand that, you know, what they're doing is working, you know, and to trust the process, trust what they are instilling in their kids, because sometimes as parents you can get discouraged, like, oh, you know, my teenager think they know it all, they're not listening to me, they're not getting it. And you'd be surprised that every time that you take that moment in the car, every time you take that moment to share something, and don't hold it back, to trust the process, to trust that it is getting into them. They are receiving it. They may not express it now, you know, but they will, and it will come out, and it will be manifested in a way that is needed for their generation. But to be encouraged and not give up and not stop, and to always just be consistent when it comes to pouring these values and these lessons into your young one or to the next generation.
Yeah, I think that is super helpful, because I think there's probably a lot of parents out there that feel that it's not getting through. Every single time that I talk to them about honesty or integrity or doing what you say you're going to do, or all those important values of hard work and determination and fortitude and stuff, and every single time I talk to them, the only thing that they're doing is they're got their headphones on, or they're in their phone all afternoon, or they're watching TV nonstop, or they're looking out the window in the car. Like, it's difficult because it will wear on a parent, because I believe it was another one of the podcasts is, do you feel like you're doing it too much? Do you feel like you're overbearing? Do you feel like you're not getting through? And so it's tough for parents to not give up, you know, and to stay the course. Because it was funny, my significant other was asking me the other day, who is in your head when you have to make a decision? Whose voice do you hear? Is it your mother? Is it your father? Is it a grandparent? Is it an aunt? Is it an uncle? And I thought it was a really deep question, because I had never really thought about it before. But for me, I have to feel lucky and privileged that I have the ability to, one, have both parents that you know, have given me a good foundation, but that I have both of them in my head, depending on what it is. You know, I can hear my mom talk about some things. I can hear my dad talk about some things. So making sure that you stay the course as the guardian of their internal brain is huge. It's profound. My dad always kind of came up with an old saying. He's like, I have to get you physically to 18. He's like, but I know at 18, between 18 and probably about 26, you're gonna lose your mind. He's like, if I can get your mind to 26, you're fine. You're set. And it wasn't until I came on the other side of 26 that I really understood what he was talking about. But it was so true, you know, on a regular basis. You know, I mean, I didn't think I was invisible when I was or invincible when I was 21, 22. I knew things could happen to me, but at the same time, I didn't really grasp life yet. And then when I started to get older, I started to realize and have a little bit more life experience, that all of a sudden these things that he had been teaching me since the time I was, you know, tiny, came to roost. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. So, you know, staying the course is a big thing that I think people can take advantage of. I also think people can really take advantage of talking to their children more. And not necessarily talking to them, but instead of lecturing, because I know that's an easy road to get into, is to talk to them in a way that enables them to talk to you, because then you really kind of get inside like their brain and learn the way that they think, learn the way that they absorb information, which will then in turn allow you to help teach them better future down the road. Get them to talk about themselves, what they're feeling, what their thoughts are when they go through certain experiences in life, because that will give you super valuable feedback on the things that they will value and find important. And then I think you can cater your skills to them.
Yeah, for sure. You know, as a parent, you know, or a guardian, you have to be, that's why I say patience, you know, be able to listen and be able to listen, especially when they get in their modes when they want to talk. You know, sometimes they want to talk. They don't want to talk, but in the modes when they do want to talk, just be able to listen to them is a powerful role that we think that is not doing much, but for them to express themselves and feel that they are safe, you know what I'm saying, with you, their ideas, their craziness is safe with you as they learn themselves, that it's a safe place to express, and that you're not going to look at them any differently, and you're going to love them unconditionally through it all. And also, you know, so it's been times where I've just listened. I haven't said much, you know, I don't say much at times, and I just listen, and I listen to, you know, what they're really saying, what's behind, you know, them talking about their day at school, you know, and the heartbeat behind it, and also listening to what they're not saying, you know, everything. You'd be surprised of how much information you get by just listening. So I think that's, like you said, that's a key component to communicating and keeping communication open between, you know, your young person and the next generation. Because if they're close to you emotionally, then you're not going to be able to pass anything down, any values down to them anyway. You know, and that sometimes that takes withholding what you think is right, what your opinion, withholding that, you know, and seeing that they have to go through their process, you know, and understand when to come in and to speak and to say that, you know, and that's, you know, that takes patience and a reserve and a strength that you know that you have the answer, you know, that you have something, well, I would say something that can help them, but it's not time yet to release it and say it to them, because you're waiting for them to be open to you enough to receive what you have to say, you know. And so when you say that to a young person, you know, you may say it and sometimes just leave it, you know. And what you have said, like, it's so many things, like you mentioned, Mike, so many things that my dad and my mom have taught me over the years, how to be patient with your words, and how to just say things to kind of leave it sometimes. And, you know, what they have said, I hear it again from the clerk at the cash register. You know, and it's like, man, that's what my mom said. Oh man, that's what my dad said, you know. And so to trust the process and that, to trust that, you know, the wisdom that you're teaching your kids will be echoed, you know, in multiple areas, and they may listen to you, and it may not seem like they're always listening to you, and that you have their ear all the time, but they are, and they will receive that wisdom and will receive that understanding of the areas that will always just kind of point back to what you said.
The fact that you kind of brought that full circle, I think, was really nice. And the part that really got me as well was the part that you talked about removing your opinion from either the lesson or the teaching. I think that is so exceptionally valuable for a lot of parents, because it's extremely easy to, when you're discussing a topic or whatever, to inject your viewpoint on the particular subject matter. It's easy to talk about how you feel politically, you know, about maybe the climate, or how you feel about education or history, or you know, the values that you're talking about, working hard and all this kind of. It's easy to to interject those things. But I think it's super important into a young, impressionable mind for them to be able to make their own decision, to make their own thought process, to connect the dots in the ways that they best resonate with them. Because I think that's also how a lot of potentially negative opinions of things get passed down, is from parents saying they had one bad experience in their life before the child was even born, and all of a sudden it's clouded their judgment about maybe an entire group of people. And then all of a sudden when they have their kids, they say, hey, don't associate with this particular person, don't associate with these type of people. And without even knowing it, they've essentially told their child to be discriminatory. And that's not something that anybody needs. And it's not a malicious thing. It's not something that I don't think many people intend to do, but it's a byproduct of them kind of being. And you have to be cognizant of that and say, hey, you know what? This is my opinion. Let me separate that from what we're talking about and realize maybe my opinion should be better said in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, when maybe you have formulated your own opinion. And then we can have a wonderful conversation about how we see this one particular instance differently. And then who knows, your mind could be changed based on something that your child says, and opening up those, those ports to thinking things differently. Now, I want to pivot the conversation a little bit to, I guess you could say, the older generation, right? Because there's a constant, I would say, churn sometimes in which they feel that the younger generation maybe doesn't have some of the values that they had to go through, some of the difficulties that they had to go through. Things are super easy. They don't know the value of hard work. They don't know the value of networking and pounding the pavement for jobs, or having to not know where your next meal is coming from, and those type of things. How do we have that conversation with, I guess, our parents or the older generation to say, hey, I think these things are happening, but they're happening differently than the way you experienced it, and that's okay.
Yeah, good point, man. I mean, it's two ways when you think about bridging. It's two ways. So it's, to the generation that's going forth, your generation, which is us, we're the bridge, and we have the younger generation, and then we have the older generation that's behind us. And so I think it's important that the fact that you make is that it's both ways. And I would say this, when it comes to older people, sometimes they can, and the older generation, sometimes they can be stuck in their ways, right? And it's a saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And sometimes they're going to see it how they see it. They live life, and they'll probably tell you, keep living, you'll find out, and these things. So it takes, again, a strength and to understand that everyone, the older generation, is very powerful, and we need what they have. The next generation need what they have, but to understand that we may not be able to change their viewpoint, and that's okay. We may and be at peace at that, but to understand and be able to extrapolate what they are giving, and what they are giving, and what they are teaching, and be able to pass that along to the next generation. Because when, let's take, the current events that's going on right now with social injustice, and it's like reminiscing of the civil rights and everything that's going on, and how this generation of young people are not they're not taking it. They're saying, no, not in my generation. social injustice, racism is not going to carry on in my generation, and I'm going to make an effort. So in words, this is their civil rights. This is their moment in time. And I think as the older generation look at it and actually see like, wow, okay, the landscape is a little different. They're not getting hosed like we got hosed back in the 50s and the 60s. They're not having to deal with certain things that we're dealing with, but yet they still have the courage to fight, and they still are using their voices, and they're doing it in different ways. If it's a social media protest, if it's going out there in the streets physically, if it's dealing with laws and regulation, if it's telling people to vote, they actually will see that, wow, this young generation, they got it. And to understand that. So just for me, I would say just being at peace that some things that you may not be able to change, but the things that you can, focus on that and know that it's all working it out for the good.
I think you touched on a couple of good points. One of the ones that I wanted to bring to light again was the concept of the way that you interact and the way that you go about talking to the older generation about the information that they have, right? So I think what's really profound or can be super helpful is asking that older, more experienced generation how they would go about the problems of today based on the knowledge that they have. So not only does that open up their lens, their perspective, but it'll allow them to feel part of the process, to feel part of the solution, to feel like they are helping in the times rather than coming from a place that's so gravely different. It's the same situation, but they're looking at it through a different lens. And I think that can be a huge bridge for the younger generations to, in turn, say, okay, I might not agree with grandma, grandpa, or these elder people that I'm associating with. However, they have also been living a lot longer than I have. Let's take what's going on today and ask them, how would you go about it? At the very least, they'll give you some off-the-wall answer that might not make any sense and not be applicable, or that you might not feel is applicable. But at the same time, that could be something that may come across in another 6 weeks, 9 months, or something like that, where you said, hey, you know what? They might have been onto something. And not only that, I think that will also bring the older generation on board to say, hey, listen, everybody, they're asking me for my input. They're valuing my opinion. They're valuing the information that I'm giving them, which is in turn going to make them more open-minded to be able to help, to be able to assist, to be able to bridge the gap and share more and more often about the experiences that they went through, which will then in turn make the future outcome or the current outcome better. So on the opposite side of that is, if we're having these conversations with the older generation, how do we have those conversations with the younger generation to say, hey, these teachings are, you might want to listen. You might want to take a moment, and I understand it's different and things will be different because you have a lot longer of a space to go, but how do we say to them that might be reluctant, hey, old timer, hey, okay, boomer, I guess is the new one. Like, you have no idea of how this is going to impact, right now. I'm not sure how to go about that one yet.
That's good, man, and that's why we're on this show right now, Ideaprov. And that is a challenge. I think that we have to understand that it's a challenge, and what the same for the older generation, it's going to be the same for the newer generation. Sometimes they're not going to listen, and they're going to have their own process, and you have to be at peace with that. But one thing is, although they may not listen, the next generation may not listen when you share, the thing is that you have done what you needed to do, and you have done and you have shared, and that's all you can do. You can make a young person listen and take heed to what you have experienced, because you have to give them the dignity of their process. And so they have to go through their process to learn, oh, maybe what they were saying was true, you know? And so I'm reminded of a verse in the Bible that says they call them old because they know the way, and they call them young because they're strong. So it's two different strengths, you know, the strength of experience and the strength of vitality and energy, and they need each other. To make anything move, they need each other. The strength need the strength of vitality, need the strength of knowing the way. And I think our job and what you're doing right here, like I said, is great, because it's creating a platform for generations to bridge. It's creating a platform to problem solve. And so that's all we can do, is just do our part, and hope that the chips will lie where they may, and that's in our favor. And so just doing our part is I think it's the key. And if we're not so consumed about everything else, and if they're doing it, and if they're not going to do it, but just simply do our part, I think we'll end up at a better place.
Yeah, I agree. I'm thinking about how people go about doing their part, right? Like, so what are ways that people can, I guess, break down those walls in between the older generation, the younger generation, and that's what we're all talking about here. Like, how do we bridge that gap? I think what's the word I'm looking for? Some aspects of that have already started to begun, just with the sheer volume of technology. There's lots of information out there. People can go from many different sides and talk with different things. I do feel one of the strong ways that can be done, especially with the younger generation, is you have to make the wisdom and the knowledge from older generations applicable to the younger generations. You cannot teach in the same aspect, the same way, the same thought patterns that were useful generations ago. It doesn't really make the same sense to them. I think you have to find a way to teach differently, to shorten the teachings, to make them engaging, to, like you said, add play to it, so that way when they see these later in life, they can still use them appropriately. And it's difficult to do, or else we wouldn't have the friction that we do now sometimes. But I'm looking at some aspects of things, and I like the way that you brought up the social justice portion of it, because I feel like that is an area that could really change over the near future, whether it's police reform, education reform, politics, and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that could change. I've talked to people, of course, about the political climate, and it's all over, and I'm not going to really jump into the feelings on that, but I know that there's a lot of people out there that will say, when you look into Congress or whatever, you see the same type of person, and it is not indicative of the people that are in the United States right now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go any farther than that.
Yeah,
I'm not going to go any farther than that. But
I hear what you're saying.
You know, yeah, I mean, you look at the proposed, candidates for the next president, and both of them are 70-something years, old, going on 80, and you kind of wonder, I'm like, can we get somebody who's actually going to be around for the stuff that they've created? It's just a thought, and that's a different conversation, different episode. So I think we're on the right path to something profound here. I think it's just all in the way that how we formulate it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, and that's the creative part, finding that platform where both can intersect and understand that is value on both ends of this bridge. And so one thing that I've done recently in the age that we're in right now, social media, is I created a micro vlog with my family. You know what I'm saying? And so, like I said before, I have 2 teenagers, and it's TikTok, Snapchat, and they're on social media. And I'm like, okay, you instead of thinking of it in a way of I'm competing, it's not necessarily competing. I'm actually joining in. So it's not a competition. I'm actually joining in, and I'm getting into their world to really be able to have that ground where I can keep the lines of communication open, the lines of engagement open. And so that's a creative a creative way is to create something that you can do together that speaks to their generation, and that could be vlogging, that could be DIY, that could be anything within the digital platforms that they grew up on. That's all they know is social media, and that takes a little bit of getting out of ourselves to look at the bigger picture and to create that area, that platform, to where now I'm still teaching and I'm still instilling what I know, but I'm doing it in a different way. I'm teaching it in a different way, and they're still receiving it, even though they don't know that they're receiving it. They're still getting it, So
yeah. And I think the other thing too that we have at our disposal is to be, and you touched on it there, to be instruments of change for those generations on either side, right? So when we do get those really creative older generations that are really involved and want to share their knowledge, have them be advocates for others of their own generation to be able to spread the word of, hey, this is positive things that these other generations are doing, because they're going to respect their peers. Like 70-year-olds are going to respect another 70-year-old versus instead of having to work with the age of a 70-year-old, having to talk with a 19-year-old. Like there's a gap there. But yeah, being able to talk on the same wavelength, to say, hey, listen, I went through the same things you did in the 50s and 60s. But I talked with, my grandson, and he told me about all this kind of stuff, and it's really enlightening. It's really helpful. I want to share it with you. Then all of a sudden you get that cross body of information that can really go a long way, because then it's going to open up that other person's minds of the same age to say, hey, listen, if this person at my age can absorb this information, I can too. It's not that hard. And I think conversely, on the other side, is when we talk with those younger generations, sometimes it can be difficult for them to not see anything but themselves. And I don't want to make it seem like they're self-centered. It's just they're still young in their lives, that they're still exploring, and it's forcing them to be like, how do I figure this out? So they have to look at it through their lens nonstop. But I think a helpful tool in that tool belt is when talking with younger ones, saying, hey, if you're going to be developing these values, these teachings, how would you teach them to somebody even younger than you? And how would you instill that value? Like, so if you're talking to a teenager, it'd be like, hey, how would you teach this to somebody who's 10, who's 6, who's 7? You know what I mean? Because then at that point in time, that's going to get that teenager from saying, hey, they can't use the argument, oh, this is an old school way of thinking, this is, they're not going to be around anymore. No, this person is literally 5, 6 years, 10 years younger than you are. They're going to be right there with you. And so once you want those people to also spread the good word in between one another and be able to make a better community, a better society for everybody. And I know that's going to be difficult, but at the same time, I also feel like with how quickly things can fly through the internet and social media and friends when they're 16 years old, there's got to be a way that you can get them to flip that switch, so that way they're teaching those same things and teaching those good values and sharing good things about their grandparents to another young person.
Oh, that's perfect. It's a mindset of being multi-generational. So it's just not the buck stop here once I pass it along, but to think and to have them think that, okay, like how you said, now I give the information to you. Now, how are you going to pass along that information? And so that's just having that conversation and making the next generation conscious of that. The next generation conscious of that. And so sometimes, when young people, they can just look at the now, and look at what they're going through now and not think about what effects that the decision that they're making may affect the next generation afterwards. And so still having that conversation, that's a great value to give our young people, is the aspect of multi-generational, that you're carrying on. And, you're carrying on legacy, you're carrying on values, you're carrying on something that's greater than you. And to have the young people that think in that frame that you're doing something that's bigger than you, you're creating something that you want to outlive you, and you're passing along something that is greater than you. All right, because you're actually getting the information that I'm receiving, and now you're carrying it on. So framing the young person's mind to think multi-generational in a sense is a great a mindset to have when thinking about passing along the values down.
Yeah, I think you hit it right, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap up there, to bring it open and to make sure that people say it from a multi-generational standpoint. I want to re-emphasize that point, because I think that part can sometimes be lost in the conversation, to take yourself out and say, hey, this is helping build the community, this is helping build the society, the family unit over time, and sustained things. So to recap, to kind of bring it all together, I want to hit a couple of bullet points to kind of say, how do we bridge this gap, right? So one is to look at creative ways to gather and get young and old, all different aspects of life together, colors, creeds, nationalities, ethnicities, religions, and whatever, in a room, so that way we can do that. It's looking at a 360-degree view of the lessons, the teachings, the things that we're trying to do, help instill a younger generation with a way to problem solve on their own, to be able to look at issues, to be able to look at the dynamics of things in a different lens and come to their own conclusions. We want to make sure to be listening as much as possible and be super patient and use the power of play to instill those values, so that way we can marry the values with the memories that will help bridge and cement the values into the growing mind. We want to listen to them when they talk all the way through, and withhold our information, withhold our opinion sometimes when we feel that it's not going to be beneficial to the growth and development of an own perspective. We definitely want to absorb what generations are trying to teach and then share within those generations. So the young share with the young, the old share with the old, the middle share with the middle, so that way we can push information across that will be positive to the development of generations throughout. and carrying it on, and have the mindset that it's bigger than you. So talk positively about others in that generation and others outside your generation, because that can spread the positivity that's going to meld and build the generations together. Did I miss anything?
Perfect. No, you're dead on. Line by line. That's good.
Well, perfect. I think we got some really good stuff today. I really got to take a moment to say a big thank you to Daniel and all of the way his mind works and the stuff that he was coming up with. I think was huge to bounce ideas off of, and I think we got a lot of really good quality information, a lot of good quality steps that listeners can put in place to be able to help bridge that gap between older and younger generations. So Daniel, thank you for your time. I know, father of 3 and, youth pastor. I know time is precious for you, but I gotta say thank you for coming on board and sharing your story and your time with us.
Oh man, Mike, thank you for having me. Man, it was fun. I got a lot of good things out of this conversation as well, and keep doing what you're doing, man. I just want to encourage you, man, to your 1,000 listeners out there, millions of listeners out there. I'm speaking into existence. Well, I'm speaking it into existence for you right now, man. But this is a good work, good platform of what you're doing, man. It was a pleasure being on, and just thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. So for all you listeners out there, my millions, my tens of thousands to come, hopefully when I get a couple years down the road and you guys can see this, you can be like, yeah, it was, X and X listener number, a couple thousand. Anyway, you can always catch us on any one of our social media handles using the handle @Ideaprov, and check out our website, which is www.ideaprov.live. And then just reach out to us, interact, let us know if there's an episode that you want to hear or a topic that's kind of been on your mind, or if you want to be on the show, absolutely come and reach out to us, ideaprov@gmail.com. Let us know, and then we can definitely get you on. We'd love to have you. But make sure to stay tuned after the break. You're going to hear our invention of the week, and we'll get to it and close it out after that. Hey, welcome to another episode of Invention of the Week. This time I wanted to share something that I found online just from my own personal preferences. I was actually thinking about getting a bike just to increase my physical activity during the times of the pandemic. And so with a bike, you need a helmet. And so I came across this Lumos, which is a specialty bike helmet. Started on Kickstarter a while back. Prices range from anywhere between $129 to $179. But anyway, this bike kind of has headlights on it. It has taillights on it. As you can see from scrolling down, the videos are super crisp, and you're able to see turn signals. You're able to connect it to your Google Watch, your Apple Watch, so that way you can prevent biking accidents while you're riding late at night. So I thought this was just kind of something cool that would be able to share with as many people. If you're ever in the neighborhood for a bike helmet, apparently it came out and won the Best Invention by Red Dot in 2017. So have a look and leave your information in the comments and the description below. And as usual, you can always reach out to us using the handle @Ideaprov. Until next time.